The Gongfu Crew podcast, bringing together practitioners of various styles and schools and their unique perspectives to explore the world of Chinese martial arts. In this episode, we will talk about Chen-style Taijiquan, because I had the opportunity to sit down with Nabil Ranné, one of my main teachers, also one of the founders of the CTN, the Chen-style Taijiquan network, an association that is by now not only active in Germany, but also in Italy, Spain, the US, and even Malaysia. We were both attending the Castle Days, our yearly training camp. Well, technically, I was attending, he was teaching. So I thought, why not have him share his wisdom on Chinese martial arts in general, but specifically on Taijiquan, on health, Gongfu, and many other interesting topics. I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I enjoyed making it, and maybe you can gain some insights regarding your own martial arts practice and your own journey. So, welcome to the podcast. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk to you. Before we dive into the depth of Chinese martial arts and Taijiquan, maybe you want to quickly introduce yourself and let the listeners know who you are, what your background is, and so that they know who I'm talking to.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and happy to see you. I'm Nabil. I live in Berlin, Germany, and I mainly teach Chen-style Taijiquan nowadays. So I'm teaching in Berlin. I'm teaching abroad, and my background is that I learned from Chen Yu, who's my what you call Shifu in Chinese. So I'd say he's like my teacher in English. And I teach his forms, his methods nowadays. So that's my main interest to kind of also maintain this lineage, and this teaching, because I think there's so much like gold hidden in the Chinese martial arts, which we should, like every generation has to kind of dig for it again and find it.
And just for to make this comprehensive, you did also practice other forms of Taiji and also other martial arts a little bit like before, right? You didn't start out with Chen Yu's Taiji, but that is what you're focusing on now. Yeah,
I studied in my teenage years. I studied with Taekwondo because that was basically what was the only thing which was around, but even that was pretty difficult to get to.
Yeah, same for me, actually.
And then I kind of maintained the practice, but I didn't continuously practice or achieve anything. I didn't really achieve much there, but I still maintained the practice, and it kind of shaped my early understanding of martial arts. And then I started to study Chinese martial arts, different Chinese martial arts. Then started to do Chen style, more what we would call the village lines. And then at some point when I saw Chen Yu the first time, I saw something of him, I just saw a photo, and at that moment in time I knew that I would one day study with him.
I think we're going to dive into that again a little bit later, but since we already talked about different martial arts, and we want to give the listeners a bit of a frame of reference, maybe let's start really at the beginning or at the basics. Like, how do you define martial art or martial arts? Like, what is it to you, and what makes a method of practice a martial art in your perspective?
I think, that's a tough question in a way, but if we look at the martial arts all over the world, I would think that there are certain movement practices which can be a bit more competitive and sporty. They can also be more cultural, but as soon as they kind of have some sort of martial intention with the movements, I would already probably say that they are like a martial art, right?
So including weapons, bare hands, and essentially.
Yeah, probably. It's an interesting question. I've never really defined it. So now that you asked me, I would say probably everything. I would probably stop saying it's a martial art when we start using fire guns, or even I have to think bows and stuff is Yeah, it's also probably a martial art. So probably it has some ancient roots. So I would probably stop at the term like whenever it comes to firearms. But I'm not sure if that's like a proper definition. You know.
Yeah. It's not that easy, right, to actually define it. Yeah. So I mean, we will talk about Chinese martial arts in on the podcast, but also in our discussion here. Do you use the term Gongfu or Kung Fu or Wushu to describe what you do, or what, like I mean, other than Taijiquan, obviously? And how would you define these terms? Or like
yeah, Wushu is of course it's an old term, and I think sometimes they also call it Wu Yi, right? And they had like different names.
It kept changing even in imperial times, right? It's
yeah. So nowadays, I think it's really connected to the modern wushu, right? So, which is much more acrobatic and yeah, it's like an acrobatic sport system, probably. So I don't really use the term wushu to describe our practice. And then Gongfu, of course, yeah, I would use the term quite a lot because my teacher. He quite often referred to our practice as Taiji Gongfu. So meaning that we should all aspire to attain Gongfu, like a certain skill, a deep skill, which is acquired over time. So this is probably how I would define that term.
Yeah.
And in our terms, of course, it's like a martial skill, but it should be like, it's not about the technique, but it should be like the martial art is written into your body, right? It's like really put an imprint on your body and your body structure, the way you move. So it's like it has become a deep skill in a way. So
yeah.
That is Kung Fu. I can't remember the third term you asked me.
Well, I mean, Kung Fu, which technically is the same, but I mean, that's why I'm asking, because you're using Kung Fu in the original meaning of the word and not as a synonym for martial arts as it's in modern times sometimes used. I think that's why I ask, because it's important to clarify. Otherwise, people might be very confused when you refer to this and they don't know the background of the term. Actually,
yeah, Kung Fu. I never use the word Kung Fu unless somebody asks me like, "Oh, do you do Taiji or do you do Kung Fu?" That's what a lot of people in the West ask, and then I try to like explain.
Yeah, it's like asking, "Do you drive a BMW or a car?"
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's like most, like a lot of schools actually. Like started using the terms that way, you know, like you have a fast practice and that is always like Kung Fu, and then you have something slow, so you can also have a bit of like an older clientele, and so I do understand the question a lot of people have, but of course, as you know, it's like not the traditional meaning.
So what are typical characteristics, or how do you define and describe like Taijiquan, like in like what do you do? I mean, maybe I don't know if you want to define it like for all forms of Taijiquan, because there are also a lot of different varieties. Maybe it's just what you train and teach, but what are the defining characteristics of what you do?
You know, this is a bit like a question where I think about what detail should we talk about. Like I have a very primitive sort of definition, because you know, like if you looked at all the internet discussions over the last decades, sort of, and I read a lot of that stuff, you know, when I was younger. Yeah. So there's a lot like people who say like Taiji is being defined by principles, and I find that always problematic, because people are not using the same principles in different Taiji styles necessarily, unless you say something like yin yang, which is like very, very meta, you know. So I mean, that's, well, you could even say like maybe the whole world is yin yang because it's so meta, you know, so it's not really defining anything. So I find that a bit difficult. So I always like to choose a very primitive definition, and to me the primitive definition is something like you do one of the 5 family styles of Taijiquan, or something which derived from those. So according to like most historical work, the practice came from Chen in Chen village, then spread over to the old Wu style, the Yang style, the next Wu style, the Sun style, and now we have the family styles. And then of course we have a lot of people who practice similar things, or like even of course I would also include the styles which come from the vicinity of the Chen village, like Jiao Bao, of course, and so on. So I would just say like this is like the traditional, like almost like a historical definition.
Yeah.
So that doesn't say anything about if someone's doing one of those things in a very bad way. I would personally still say it's Taijiquan, even if it doesn't adhere to any lot of Taiji related body work, but like externally speaking, it's still, I would still call it Taijiquan. Maybe it's not good Taijiquan then, but it still is Taijiquan. And then all the styles can define what they define as good body work, and that can then differ, I think.
I think as a definition, I mean, it's coming more from also like a system theories perspective. I think as a definition that makes more sense, because when you define, otherwise you have the fallacy, there's no true Scotsman fallacy, where you just say, okay, only good Taiji is real Taiji, and then like how you will never actually arrive at any definition, because it's always very subjective. But talking about subjective, so just talking about like the Taiji that you practice, how would you describe, like what would you describe then as good Taijiquan from your perspective?
There's I could say a lot now. I don't know if we have time.
Let's dive into it. I think it's
2 hours. Well, you basically you want to create something like a whole body force, right? Like a zhengqi hejin. Like the whole body should be like a closed sort of unit, so it works together when we issue forces and power and so on. So that's surely one of the like higher goals of the practice, And then that also entails somehow, of course it entails the body, the arms, the torso, the legs, but it also entails like intentional work or mind work in a way, because quite obviously the brain is part of the body. So if you want to like create something like a whole body force, that will include the neurological system in a way, and a lot of intentional work, and so you try to become really unified in a way, and I think that's one of the higher goals. And then of course you can talk about how do we want to achieve that in our style, because I think that's also like something which probably some styles would agree on. And then you have like on the technical level you have quite hard requirements in terms of how big should be your stances, how wide should your stances be, how do you want to like set the quad, the hip joints, how can you connect it to the feet, how can you be upright, how can you drive movements from center, and so on. So that includes a lot of like very detailed sort of body work and creating a lot of jin, like very specific jin. Like pang would be of course one of the general jin forces. That describes a lot of the practice. So we do a choreography which has been handed down, like from Chen Shangxing to Chen Fake, Chen Zhaohui, Chen Yu, and then you practice a jin inside this choreography.
Was that because you mentioned like when you saw Chen Yu, even like on a picture, but I would assume also when you then saw him in person, that you knew like, okay, so this is what I want to practice. I would assume that Chen Yu manifested a lot of these qualities, or maybe like all of them, to you. Like how does it, like what was it exactly, like where you said, oh yeah, this is where I can see that I want to be, or I want to be able, I want to have the skill set, I want to have this Gongfu. Like what is he exemplifying, or what did he exemplify to you when you met him?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, at the time I was already practicing Chen-style, but I couldn't name any of the qualities, really. So nowadays I would, of course, now I would like analyze it from a different kind of perspective,
Yeah.
So I was probably seeing, I mean, I was at the time I thought I just saw something like Gongfu, which like, and the body which is like showing a lot of this Gongfu, it felt like, the body feels really heavy, very mobile, very sort of supple, and the martial spirit in the posture. I really liked that. I couldn't really grasp what I was seeing. Nowadays I could of course say how many like connections there are, like how the open closes in the body and so on. so I would be able to analyze it more. But I think that I was seeing something quite unspecific, but I thought, wow, that's really great. And then when I saw him the first time move, I always thought like, oh, that's such a natural way to move, and such a powerful but also soft way in a way, like, because every part of the body really moves. So that is in a way softness, right? So yeah, I was really blown away, and I think that's something which is really written into the sort of Gongfu.
Yeah, and I remember that you mentioned once, and I think this is kind of also important to establish, because some people, you already mentioned that the separations, like, oh, this is Kung Fu, this is Taiji, is very common, right? With Taiji being like the practice for the elderly and whatever. But I think you mentioned that when you practiced push-hands or just did partner practices with Chen Yu, aside from the joint locks, we might talk about stuff like that later, but it felt like you were kind of, had like a boulder rolling over you. So actually, it wasn't just it looked powerful, actually it was quite powerful, right? When you practice it.
Yeah. There's always this thing when people talk about the soft power of Taiji, but I think it leads to a lot of problems, to be honest. And I think we should much more talk about connections. And then if you touch a connected body and if it moves, it can feel soft to you because it's moving and like luring you into emptiness, sort of, you know. But on the other hand, it can also feel very, very hard. You know, if you're pushing into a very connected structure, it can feel hard to you. But both feelings don't really say anything about the structure. You know, it's just, the feeling says something about how you feel about it, how you experience it, and if it feels soft to you or hard to you. But you know, this is like an external perspective. But when you're doing Taiji, if it feels soft or hard to the other person, it doesn't really matter to you, right? It should work in a way. And I think that's something people think like, oh, if I touch something, like if I do Taiji and I touch hands with a Taiji master or something, like, oh, it should feel very soft to me. But why should it be like that?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, and quite often it's being used also to make the other person weak. So this is something where I think this talking about feelings, I mean, on the one hand it's important, but not like talking about someone's body skills or so from an external perspective, how it feels to you, because it doesn't matter. It matters how you connect the body and how you not stiffen up the body, but how you make it movable or like mobile it can move from segment to segment in a coherent way, and that is creating the Jin, right? So of course, if everything's moving, it might feel very soft to the other person.
Yeah. So the idea is, I mean, we talked about this before, obviously, but so you said there are actually tangible results that show skill, and it's not just about the subjective feeling of, oh, you know, it feels nice when I touch him, but actually there is something maybe not measurable, but like I said, it works or it doesn't, and maybe that's a more interesting baseline rather than some kind of highly subjective individual assessment of whether that movement feels soft or nice or something, right? Is that?
Yeah, also because it's like an external. I mean, feelings. It's like. I mean, on the one hand, they are important because we don't have much else, right? Like the day we come into this world, we feel something, and then we start to like value, like, is it good, is it bad, blah blah blah. But so we have nothing else really, but to communicate with other people or even with ourselves, you know. So am I sitting straight? Where's my weight? These are all feelings in a way. So it's good to also cultivate them, but they can also change. Like in all these these things where we actually attach values to feelings. You know, it's like already like an evaluation. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it soft? Is it hard? This always changes from day to day anyway, and with our experience it changes. So you can't have a feeling lead your practice. You know, I think in that regard, when I started learning from Chen Yu, it was also very technical. I mean, of course, you want to overcome the technical at one point, but you can't start with nothing and just overcoming everything in the day one. But you have to put certain things into your body, like open close sounds so easy, but it's very difficult to do. You know, if you want to like have a closing leg force, if you if you blah blah blah, you have like how you connect the upper body. It's very specific, and you have to put that into your body, and then at some point you can transcend the art in a way. You know, in the art shows in your way of life.
Yeah.
And that's Gongfu in a way, but you still have to start from techniques.
Yeah.
It's really like a music instrument. You can't just say, oh no, I play a great song, but first you have to do a scale or learn a note or, you know,
practice chords and stuff.
Chords, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that was a great segue, because let's dive deeper into the training aspect. You already gave kind of like an abstract, like a rundown on a high level. Like, how do you train for these skills then? Like, what would beginners expect? How do you move to more intermediate level? And then maybe talking about the transcending aspect is not that easy, you know, put it into words, but we can try. How do you train this?
Well, the most important tool, or however you want to call it, is definitely the ilu, the first road. So that's the choreography which everybody will learn who's starting in our style. So of course we have some jibengung, like basic exercises, which help us to train certain aspects, like certain rotations, certain like stability or building power or whatever. And but then like how we integrate the methods, that's usually we use the first road. So you start learning a choreography, but while you learn the choreography, you already learn all the methods, like the small methods, you know, also the big methods in terms of like, oh, stay upright, lift your head up, tuck your chin in. But then a lot of the finer methods, what part of the body you lead from, you know, how you open and close, and how you use, I don't know, the lower back, the upper back. So then it becomes much more specific, but it's always Jin related. And Jin, of course, as you said, like it means force, but there's also like an intention behind it, right? So it's not like stupid force in the sense, oh, you push something in, but you don't really know what to do. But it's like, it's usually more articulate. It's more refined in a way, like, if you're cutting inside something, how are you using the hand? How does it coordinate with the elbow? And then everything kind of derives from that. No. And then you're basically stringing it all together. So this is a main practice. And of course, some people like to learn it more like superficially, more like externally going through the choreography. And then some people like to learn it more detailed from the beginning. And that's probably, I think, that achieves better results. No. If it doesn't stifle your practice too much. You know, of course you could also say like, oh, I can't do the first 3 movements, so you train it for the next 10 years because they will never be perfect. That's a bit too much, you know, but I think otherwise it's good to learn the details, to learn the next movement, learn the details. You will forget something, and then you learn it, and after a while it will be like second nature in your body.
Yeah. And I mean, when you talk about ilu, like the first form, or kata, I guess, for people with maybe background in Japanese martial arts, it is actually quite long, right? Like how it has officially 89. Yeah, so 89 postures, but some of them are actually involve several movements. So, how long would it take you to actually practice, like seriously practice the form, if you do it as a whole piece? To
learn it or to practice?
To practice, like to go through.
Yeah, if you do it really quickly, you could probably do it in 15 or 20 minutes. It's a very superficial sort of, or very dynamic. You just go through the movements. Then if you practice a bit more about the contents, like you want to, then maybe it's 40 minutes. And then if you want to have like a very grinding, intense practice, it can be like 50 or 60 minutes.
So essentially one form, one routine is actually a workout, kind of.
Yes. Yeah. If you do it properly, after one form, you actually need some rest. Yeah. If you do it like that, yeah.
But that's again very interesting, I think, for people who only know Taiji, you know, as health practice for the elderly. It means it can be quite exhausting, right? There's a strong physical aspect. Would you call it athletic, or?
Well, there's this very strong physical aspect, and it's or let's say it can be. If you have more like cultivation, I think sometimes differentiate between training, which can be intense, and more cultivation. Cultivation, I think it's something like you're using the practice to benefit your daily life. So training is more like you're learning the art, you're like improving the art. Yeah. So it can be quite intense on your body, quite obviously. But then if you're just using it to cultivate something, like to feel good after your after, I don't know, you were ill, or you're getting up and you want to have a nice start into the day, then you're like, it's like cultivational practice. And cultivational practice is usually of lower intensity, I'd say, you know. But both is like, for me, it's like a balance. You can't get up and then train like bitterly immediately, because I don't think you can maintain that over a long period of time. So you have times where you train the art, and times where you then, especially if you're getting older, where you more like cultivate the art and you integrate it more into your daily lives. So in a way, it's athletic, but I think athletic, at least to me, is quite often linked to a way to where I would say it's not really linking the body. It's not like a whole body thing. It's more like something specific. I think that's how a lot of more like modern sports sciences will view the body and body skills and so on. So I'm not really using the term too often.
But then, like, there's a Chinese term, xia Gongfu, right? Like, kind of, I don't know how to translate it, like laying down the foundation for Gongfu, or like building Gongfu. That would be the more demanding training.
Yeah, you invest in the Gongfu. You're like, and also while you're learning the methods, if your teacher's showing you something and you're like, oh, but this shouldn't feel too intense now, that's a bit, you can't really train like that, right? It's like, if it feels intense or not, it depends, but you should put the method into the body if your teacher is showing it. So at least, like, if you go and learn from a traditional Chinese teacher, you know, so it's not about how you feel, but you just do it in a way. You're training the art, and and then if you've trained it, you can use it in your daily life. You know?
So ILU, or first form, first routine, is the main part. What other? I mean, you mentioned Jibin Gong, like basic exercises. What other elements are there, and how do they relate to the training, and also maybe the training progression? Like, I mean, there's a second form, partner practice, but maybe you can go a bit more into detail regarding the other aspects, the important aspects of the training.
Oh yeah, you have the ILU, the first road. So like you said, it's like there's also like they're called chöjia, like I don't like segmenting the frame or something, like explaining the applications inside the movements, or like Jungfa, you know, like application methods. So, and then of course that's like technical training you can do with a partner. So, and it's also about understanding the form movements better. You know, like if you never encounter force in some way, it's very difficult to understand how you have to kind of connect the body to to become resilient and to sort of resist, or not resisting in a hard way, but like to maintain your integrity, sort of. So, and that's basically what you can learn with a Jungfa practice, to learn the techniques and dissect the form in a way. And then we have the second road, which is like very similar to the first one, but more dynamic and more explosive, more jumps and so on. So it's maybe a bit more physically demanding, but even there I'm not even sure if that's right. Like, it is more dynamic. Maybe it's not really more demanding.
Different type of
training, just a different focus in a way. And then of course you also have Jungfa there, so it's also like certain techniques which you can train with a partner. And then of course you have the Tuisho routines, where you basically train everything, like you have certain patterns to train with a partner. Pushing hands, yeah. And then you can go into more freestyle applications and so on.
So sparring,
that sort of thing.
There are also supplemental exercises, right? Like for strength training, for conditioning. Yeah, is that a big? Again, people might be surprised, right? Taiji usually doesn't evoke pictures of somebody actually training strength. What role does conditioning play in traditional Taiji practice of your variant?
I mean, Chen style has a lot of weapon forms, so that's also like a bit of conditioning practice in a way, especially if you train with heavy weapons. And then you have certain things like the bang or the chi, they call it, like the short stick, which involves a lot of twisting actions with the arms, but it's also training the waist and the torso power. And then of course you have the dagan, the long pole. And then you can do additional stuff like, I don't know, with stones, or I usually take a kettlebell just because I couldn't really find a good heavy Taiji ball, you know. And then you can do some condition training. But it's like, I wouldn't say it's like super important, but on the other hand, it's also not important. I find it a bit difficult. Like you can, I think it's also like a bit about a certain stage of training. You should do some. Then once you've understood how to work with the weights, you can actually put everything into the form. And then the form is so intense that you don't really need anything anymore. But I think it's also good to get some experience with weights and so on. And then I'll always try to use like the Taiji Jin, you know, so you're not training a different sort of force, but I would still use the Peng, you know, the expansive sort of Jin. And I would, with a lot of tools, I would, of course, use the Chan Rao, the twisting and winding sort of force, and so on. So there are a lot of Taiji aspects I would put into that training. And that's similar to partner training, right? Like you have some heavy object, if it's moving or if it's not moving, and then you basically want to maintain the same sort of principles, because that's a very good way how to cope with power.
Yeah. So you mentioned kettlebells. So I would assume that you are absolutely okay with misappropriating like other training tools, but then bring in Taiji principles or other exercises maybe as well, and modify them and include them when you can use like Taiji ideas or other ideas from Taijiquan.
So there's also like a conditioning training where I think which is probably not very good for the forms. You know, if you force your body to do a lot of linear movements, for example, it's probably not really benefiting your Taiji practice, you know.
Would it hurt in your opinion though, or is it just not really super helpful? Like, what's your personal experience with that?
I personally, I'd probably think it would hurt. Yeah, at that point it would hurt.
And at that point, what do you mean at that? Like a specific point in your training, or in?
Well, if you're using a lot of that, because in my mind that's a very personal decision. You know, that's I don't want to make like a I don't know, like a religion out of this, but it's like a personal opinion. I think when I pick an art like this, it really changes your movement, changes the way you move, you stabilize, you perceive yourself in the world, even, like, because we're working so much with the perceptive system in a way, you know, like how to look, how to hear, blah blah blah. To then find practices which are like which are contrary to that, it does not seem very logical to me. So if I like the practice and I see how it's like I'm benefiting from it, I just go for it, you know. So, and then personally I would do things which are like really contrary to that. And then movements are tricky, because if you bring your body to move in a very different way, I don't think it will actually, like, you will benefit from it, but you will actually, your body doesn't know how to move. So it always has to be like an intellectual decision. Oh, do I move like this now, or do I move like that? And it doesn't become like second nature. So I would personally not really do that. I can see it in people like who are studying certain arts which are very contrary to that. Like, for example, classical ballet. Again, I don't have anything against classical ballet, so it's not like a quality assessment or so, but there is a movement habit inside the practice which is completely against the Taiji practice. So even if people are very athletic and they can super well coordinated, it's very difficult to move in the Taiji way. Not externally speaking, but more internally speaking. So then you have practices which are contradicting one another. So at some point I would say it's probably not very useful. But of course, if that person is just like, oh, okay, I want this, I do want to do this, and they don't want to go too deep, then of course it doesn't matter too much.
But then if I sum up, or like I don't know if that's a fair summary, you would advise against maybe practices or going deep in practices that try to kind of force you into a different habit of movement or a different idea of how you want to move your body, use your body, and you would prefer to maybe look for tools or exercises like maybe like clubs or the Bulgarian bag that allow you to stick closer to the idea of movement behind Taijiquan, right? That you can
And then if you're doing a different martial art, you can also still look for the same sort of. You can do that, but it's like if you look for the same sort of like patterns inside your body, you know.
But it does sound a little bit like the Taijiquan that you practice is a bit jealous in the sense of it doesn't really like to share the stage with or like split the attention, you know, across different styles. Is that, would you say that's kind of?
I don't know. I mean, jealous means I don't think we have to. Jealous sounds a bit like it should, or looking down at something, or it's like very emotional. I'm trying to make it like very logical. You know, it's like if you're learning how to stretch out your arm all the time and how to generate power with that, your body will learn that.
Yeah.
And it's working in a way. If you're stretching out your arm into someone's face, it will probably hurt. You know, so, and if you do that a lot of times, it will probably hurt more. So it's working, it's fine. But for Taiji practice, there are reasons why we don't want to do that, and how we connect the body and how we work with rotational forces. I would say, like, why don't you just use more rotational force and pimp the movement in a way, rather than doing the other movement in learning another movement pattern, you know? So it's a logical argument. It's not about being jealous necessarily.
Yeah, you don't want to continually fight, or you don't want to have different habits fighting each other, kind of like in the way you move.
Yeah, because like these martial arts, I think that's a lot of people don't really talk about it, or I don't know. It's like they entail a certain strategy also. They are very like a very integrated sort of practice. So if you use Taijiquan, there's a way of movement, of course, how you move, but there's also like how you connect to the opponent, and what is your strategy to cope with that other person in a martial situation. So it's not arbitrary, you know. You can't choose another strategy and move in the Taiji way, or vice versa. It doesn't really make too much sense. So
if you want to develop these specific skills, you kind of have to train that specific way also to have these skills come out. Essentially. And since you already mentioned like strategy and the kind of, you know, training can be means to an end, like what is that end? What is the strategy? You talked about like confrontation. What's the frame of reference here, like the martial aspect?
Yeah, like for example, like Taijiquan, it does not favor too many long range sort of things, you know. So like if you want to, and it's not jealous in the sense, like if you wanted to do for example, like a competition art, a sport, a martial competition sport, then of course you could also do Taijiquan and go into that format and also work with a lot of Taiji stuff, but some formats would be better suited than others, you know. So if you choose a long range format, it would probably not be so well suited, and you could not use a lot of the things. So then again, we would have a bit of like a contrary sort of training effect. Other formats are probably you can benefit a lot from them, you know. So it's not necessarily jealous in the sense like just generally being jealous, but more like looking for certain skills which are more congruent to one another and more coherent. And what you said, I think, like, it's a traditional martial art, so it actually comes from a very archaic sort of mindset. It's very brutal in many senses, you know, how you envision a fight. It's like, it's not nice. It's you go in full throttle with everything you have. You punch, you rip, you china, joint lock, you know, you press points, whatever it's not a very nice art in that sense.
You're trying to attack a lot of anatomical weak spots, essentially.
But you're not. But it doesn't mean you become a weak, like a nasty person or aggressive. You know, usually most Taiji people are actually quite nice people. So, but the strategy is definitely not nice. You know, it's not like a super gentleman art or whatever. Then it wouldn't work very well. You know, so I think the fighting context is actually quite brutal in a way. It's not very sporty or gentleman-like. But
you already mentioned this idea of like, you know, different formats and different skill sets. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, I mean, you don't have to kind of come up with a very specific rule set where you say, hey, this would actually work. But like in general terms, you said so long range. You don't, like Taijiquan doesn't build a lot of skills that might be super useful in such a long range competitive format. Then what are the skills that you would develop with Taiji, and And what is the idea behind the usage and the application in a physical confrontation?
Well, you generally speaking, you will develop a lot of stability and mobility. So stability means like it's difficult for people to move you around, to throw you, to bring you in situations where you don't want to be. And the mobility is, of course, you can issue a lot of power in like a lot of shapes, very short shapes also, like short movements in certain shapes where I think a lot of people would think, oh, how can you actually issue power from that position? So I think that's something Taiji would definitely develop. And then also I teach a lot of stepping methods, for example, like there's certain, how do you step in confrontational context, and how you can make the stepping nimble and so on. And then, of course, all the China skills like the joint locking and different ways to hit and so on. So I think you can put that into a lot of different contexts if you like to do that. You know?
And since you mentioned that it can be quite nasty, how do you safely train that? Like how do you approach training for techniques that seem to be a bit difficult to practice in a nice manner? Yeah,
that's something I think we have to talk about mindset in a way. I think if we were perfect teachers, and I'm the least perfect teacher you can ever choose to have, so you would probably create formats which take certain aspects of the training, and you would also teach the mindset which is with which this format would make sense. Like for example, you take a drill to learn a certain technique. So in that drill, it doesn't really make sense to become super competitive, because then it would always mean you're going out of the pattern.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like a very linear sort of a very mindset. It's like, oh, you just do the drill, and your body learns that way, but it's not like a super creative sort of mindset. But then you might have something where you teach something like maybe a very dangerous technique. So again, it doesn't make sense to do that in a very competitive format, because the possibility of injury would be too high. So you have to do it with a very cooperative sort of mindset. Then you can do a competitive exercise where you have very clear rules. Like, I don't know, sumo or push hands rules or whatever. So people can use a lot of their power and make mistakes, but also just go a bit more intense, But you're like, okay, they won't hurt each other too much. And then you might, I don't know, have conditioning training, or you also can have creative training where you say, oh, now you can invent techniques, or you go free flow, And then people can become creative and thoughtful of one another, so they don't hurt one another. But it's actually always like a different mindset. And I think that way we can kind of dissect the whole segment of Taiji application possibilities and train them.
Yeah.
And then if you want to be more specific about a very specific combat sport, then of course that combat sport would tell you what rules you can adhere to.
Mm-hmm. So the martial side, I think, now came out nicely. Obviously, I mean, not just for Taijiquan, but especially for Taijiquan, I think it's important to also consider the health aspect, because that is what a lot of people associate with Taiji. And maybe that is also one of the characteristics of a lot of Chinese martial arts, right? That is kind of built in. But how would you define health, and how do you cultivate it or protect it, boost it through Taiji practice?
I mean, health, there's the prevention aspects and then the rehabilitation, right? So, and I think, like you say, the Chinese martial arts, they, not always, but quite often, they have some health aspects put into them, because traditionally, of course, you want to practice something, but you don't want to ruin your body practicing that. So in Taijiquan, we work so much with a good body structure, So, the way how we root our weight, for example, it's so important. So, if you don't think about your weight, or how you're working with gravity, and how you're connected to the center of gravity in your own body, and how it falls down in your body, kind of, how you root, then of course every movement will create lateral forces inside your body, which will lead to a lot of joint problems, for example. So that's why we really think about how to root, how to rotate. So, for example, the knee joints in our, like Chen Yu is always like super clear about analyzing the knee problems, which actually a lot of Taiji people have, let's be honest. But the way he like really articulated is actually like healing a lot of the knees, you know, because you hold them so stable and you build in more healthy movement patterns into your body. So I think that's one of the aspects. And then of course you have some metabolical aspects and neurological aspects because of the intention work, which is like meditational work almost, or it is in a way, and then the breathing work. So there's a lot of like stimulating the parasympathetic system and so on. So there's a lot of things built into these practices which are very healthy.
Yeah. Would you say that kind of correct Taiji practice leads to health as a byproduct, or is it a focus area? Or
I think you can't ask me. I think you have to ask each and every practitioner. You know, I don't think like the art tells you what should be your focus point. But I think if you integrate Taiji almost as a way of life in a way, then there will always be a certain balance between martial practice, intention work, meditation, spiritual practice, however you want to call that area, you know, that's a bit difficult, and then the health area. I think there's a lot of interaction between the three areas, and I don't think you need focus points anymore, or the art tells you. Like for me personally, my focus area always changed over time. But I never lost any of these areas, but it kind of changes to and fro. Maybe 1 week this, maybe next week this, and I don't care too much about it, you know.
And you already mentioned the mental training, or the more mental aspects of the training. You said meditation, or almost. I think again, meditation is something that a lot of people associate with Taijiquan. What role does it play in the training, and how is it integrated? Do you have specific exercises for this? Is it important or not? Would you even call it meditational aspects, or how would you phrase it?
Sometimes I find words, when I speak them, I find them difficult afterwards, you know, so I always meditation, I'm thinking like, what does meditation mean to most people? So I wasn't sure, but meditation, if you think about centering the mind, then of course it is definitely meditation, you know. You see the mind as a part of your existence in a way, and the body is a part of that, and your mind, and then they, you know, of course there's a certain philosophy behind it. So you have the Qin, the Shen, the Yi, and you have different aspects of mind also, you know, so, and you also bring them into a balance. So of course every time, for example, the intention, you create an intention, it should not be like just a mental imagination, but you want your intention to communicate with your body. So when you produce a jinn, it's not like an imagination, because then it has no meaning, but you want to integrate it. So in a way, the whole mental area is a part of the whole of the body, or it's like body, mental aspects, they become one integrated existence, and we're working on all aspects. So in that sense, I think it's also like meditation, or internal work, as they used to call it also. So there's a lot of Neigong aspects in the art. Yeah, so I would say the longer you do the art, the more prominent these aspects will actually become.
But like I said, they're essentially a part, and there's an overlap maybe with other meditational practices, but it's not necessarily 100% the same, right? There might be.
No, I mean, all the meditational practices, they are so specific. So, like if you look at Taoist meditation, it's very specific, right?
Yeah.
Or Buddhist meditation, it's also like the metta and the vipassana. It's quite specific. So you have those meditational practices. Of course, you can do them, but it's not necessarily a part of Taijiquan. But there's some relationship. So of course, we use a lot of the same terms, but we have it in our practice. So, for example, the breathing practice, you know, you don't breathe in the way you would necessarily breathe when you're doing a sitting meditation, because our shapes are different. So our breathing will be different, because it's integrated into the Jin work. So it needs to be different. So there's no right and wrong there. It's just like it's a different meditational practice in that regard.
So to clarify, because I think this is, at least in my experience, is something that sometimes comes up. Like doing a different or very specific meditational practice is not going to give you the Neigong aspects of Taijiquan, correct?
Yeah, probably not, unless it's
very specifically related to. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because again, my experience that sometimes people think, oh, I just need these very specific meditational practices, and then suddenly my Taijiquan will be really good. But you talk a lot about integration, so it's actually like a part of the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, in that sense, coming from the issue we had before, I wouldn't think it will necessarily be contrary to the Taiji practice. You know, if you like do metta practice, it will make you better as a human being. So I think it's a very good practice. If it relates to the Taiji skill, I don't know. If you somehow have a calmer mind, maybe it does, but it's not specifically working on the Taiji skills.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think a relatively clear picture should be emerging by now. Is there anything else that you think is really important regarding your training, your teaching, your practice that we haven't touched upon? Anything we've missed?
No, I think nowadays there's a lot of like thought about how can we use Taiji in other areas, and I think that's maybe something like if you use it in like just for health purposes, maybe then we're kind of changing the art. We're using the art in a different area, which is good, I think, but it's not necessarily the art anymore. You know, I think then if we're using the art for a different purpose, I think that's something we should differentiate, like working on the core of the art or using it to pimp something else, to improve another practice. So if you're using Taiji and put it into another martial art, that's perfectly fine. I think there's a lot we can use from Taijiquan to make something else better or analyze something better and work on movement patterns in a more holistic way and so on. But that's not necessarily Taiji anymore. You know? So, but
is it because you cut off too much of the practice because you only focus maybe on one aspect, or is it?
Yeah, I think if you're using the art, then you're not necessarily working on the art anymore. I think, like, you know, sometimes there's a thing like, oh, there's a great boxer out there, and so he's doing Taiji, and I think it's also like, in a way, it's not nice for the boxer. You know, he's like maybe a great boxer, so why would anybody say like, oh, I'm doing Taiji? No, he's just a great boxer. So, but of course, if you're like teaching someone, I don't know, like China skills, you're like working more on whole body rotational forces, and they can use it in grappling or for whatever, then they can use it, and maybe you give them an exercise from Taiji, but then to assume they are doing Taiji when they're doing their grappling practices is somehow, it doesn't feel right, you know? It's like they're not suddenly doing Taiji, because Taiji, like I said before, to me it's like a very primitive definition that we are doing one of the styles and we are like working on this art in a way. So if someone is using Taiji but he has a different focus, then I think we should differentiate it. And we should be more clear in our language, because otherwise there's always this idea like, oh, if something is a martial art, it should be like used in if it's working, then it should be used in all possible competitive situations. And I think that's a bit it's not very, you can't do that with any sport, you know. So I think that's making everything unclear. So I think that's maybe something I would like to add. I don't know if that was clear enough.
But so maybe as a final question, like how will or should your style school of martial arts then develop in the future? Like you already described certain things that you don't want to kind of see happening, or it's not, definitely not what you're kind of going for. What would be your goal or your wish?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just one small person in a big world, so, and I'm not. But I would.
After this podcast, you're going to be huge. I mean,
no, I would wish like people concentrate in a good way on the core of the art. You know, just going deep into the art. What are the traditional methods? How can we make use of them? how do they describe the body work, the mind work, and so on. So like going more towards the core of the practice in a confident way, you know, but then at the same time to be open to share a lot with other things and arts and help to, in a sense, to diffuse the art into other areas, but not change the art thereby. You know, we still may have to maintain the core, otherwise there will be nothing which is worthwhile anymore in a way. But of course it needs to communicate with other aspects of life. So we should be more self-confident also, like teaching the art to in other areas, without then saying, okay, that's Taiji now.
Yeah, it's one aspect of Taiji, but you're hoping that there will be enough people who still practice the whole thing, essentially.
Yeah.
And then you can teach others who maybe might only be interested in aspects of it, and then you can use it.
Because both is fine. Yeah. It's just, it needs both. You know, if there's nobody there who practice the integrated methods, but it's always just extracting the methods, then they kind of lose a lot of their meaning in this. So I think they become more superficial. So that's what I would wish.
All right. Well, I think after this podcast airs, your wishes will be will materialize immediately.
Oh wow!
Maybe I shouldn't oversell this. Anyway, so yeah, thank you very much for this very insightful talk. I hope the listeners also had fun by now listening to the episode, and maybe we'll have another opportunity to talk and maybe also with others about specific aspects. And until then, keep practicing.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you had a great time. The next episode will air next month. And until then, feel free to check out our Instagram account, where we also feature some of the people we talk to, other practitioners and teachers of Chinese martial arts, and anything else that might be interesting in the world of Gongfu. Thanks, take care, and hope to meet again.